The morning sun filtered through dusty window panes as students at Franklin High School stood in neat lines, reciting the national pledge with mechanical voices. Their green uniforms, some faded and frayed, flapped lightly in the breeze that passed through the open assembly ground. Near the edge of the crowd, unnoticed and unimportant, Mr. Elijah Ume moved slowly with a mop and bucket in hand. His limp made each step a quiet struggle, but his expression remained calm, almost serene, as he swept the tiled floor just beyond the platform where the school staff stood. A group of boys near the back began to snicker. One, barely hiding his amusement, leaned toward another and muttered, "Look at this cripple, always mopping like he's important." Another boy, emboldened, picked up a piece of chalk and flicked it toward Elijah's back. It hit with a soft tap. Elijah paused, turned his head slightly, and caught their gaze. For a moment, it seemed he might speak, but instead, he offered a faint, knowing smile, one that held no anger, only quiet endurance, and turned back to his work. The students laughed harder. Mrs. Atim, the principal, strutted past in her sharp heels, barking instructions into her phone. She walked right by Elijah, eyes fixed forward, as if he were a stain on the wall, something long ago learned to ignore. Not a single student saluted him. Not a teacher nodded in his direction. He was the man who cleaned the school, and in their eyes, that was all he would ever be. As the assembly droned on, Elijah rolled his bucket down the hall toward the staff block. His eyes, weary yet alert, caught the faint flicker of something above. He stopped. On the main corridor wall, a broken light socket sparked intermittently, unnoticed by the bustling students nearby. Elijah's brow furrowed, mop forgotten for a second. He glanced at the frayed wires, concern growing in his chest. No one else seemed to see it, or care, but he did. He always did. By day, Elijah Ume moved through the halls of Franklin High School with the quiet grace of someone long accustomed to being invisible. His janitor's uniform hung loosely on his lean frame, the left trouser leg slightly bunched to accommodate the stiff, unbending limb that dragged behind him with every step. The injury had occurred 12 years ago, a life split cleanly in two. Before the accident, Elijah had been a respected electrician and co-owner of a flourishing workshop in Surulere. He trained apprentices, designed backup systems for small businesses, and was saving up to marry his longtime fiancée, Amaka. But all of that ended the day faulty wiring, hastily installed by his business partner without Elijah's final inspection, sparked a fire that injured Elijah and killed a young trainee named Bayo. The workshop went up in flames. The guilt scorched deeper. His partner disappeared. Amaka left not long after the bandages came off. "I can't marry half a man," she had whispered, and though he never blamed her, those words never left him. Today, Elijah lived alone in a crumbling boys' quarters just behind the school's fence. A cramped, humid room with a squeaky fan and a bed too narrow for comfort. There was no television, only a small radio that played static-filled gospel sermons. Every morning at 5 a.m., he rose, dressed slowly, and limped his way to work. In 5 years, he hadn't missed a single day. Rain or shine, he mopped the floors, fixed squeaky hinges, and quietly took note of the building's gradual decline. In his pocket, he carried a battered black notebook. Page after page listed maintenance issues in his neat, steady handwriting. Staff room AC leaking. Exposed wire in JSS 3B. Toilet flush broken. Again. Most entries had no follow-up. No one asked for updates. Students rarely noticed Elijah unless they needed something. He'd become background, part of the scenery, like the rusting water tank or the cracked assembly podium. Some, like Tobe, a popular SS3 student with a cruel streak and a pack of followers, saw him as a target. Tobe delighted in tossing wrappers near Elijah's mop, pretending to slip near his bucket, and loudly mocking his limp for laughs. Others, like Ngozi, a quiet JSS2 girl with glasses too big for her face, offered small kindnesses, a soft, "Good morning, sir," or an occasional thank you when he opened a door. Elijah always smiled at her, gently, like someone afraid to break a fragile thing. Mrs. Atim, the principal, was a woman buried under paperwork and underfunding. She rarely spoke to Elijah unless something broke. To her, he was a necessary fixture, the man who swept silently and didn't complain when salaries came late. She never asked about the notebook, never wondered why he noticed things before anyone else. Mr. Chuks, the elderly history teacher, was perhaps the only staff member who offered a hint of respect. They shared nods in the hallway, even brief conversations about NEPA outages or generator faults. But when Elijah was mocked by students or ignored in meetings, Mr. Chuks looked the other way, the way so many do when decency asks for more than silence. Despite everything, Elijah remained meticulous. He swept every corner with precision, checked locks, replaced bulbs on his own time. He'd often pause at faulty sockets, head tilted as if listening to the wires whisper. He never sought recognition. In his mind, broken things deserved quiet care, because he knew what it meant to fall apart, to be discarded. Even broken tools can still fix things, he often muttered under his breath, as if the saying alone kept him going. And so, in a school where noise and neglect danced daily in the corridors, Elijah Ume kept moving, one slow, limping step at a time, carrying his guilt, his notebook, and a quiet belief that dignity could still be found in unnoticed work. It began on a Tuesday morning, heavy with Lagos humidity and the drone of the school generator chugging in the background. As the students stood once more in assembly lines, half listening to the principal's announcements, Elijah swept quietly behind the stage, his eyes instinctively scanning the space above. That's when he saw it, a faint red glow behind the old plywood backdrop, where the main wire trunking passed. A hiss, then a small crackle. The wires were overheating. His heart jumped. He knew that sound, that colour. It was the same angry glow he'd seen before, years ago, before the fire that changed everything. Without a second thought, Elijah dropped his mop and limped straight toward the office block. Inside, Mrs. Atim barely looked up as he entered, her glasses low on her nose, buried in reports about an upcoming inspection. "Ma, sorry to disturb," Elijah said, voice steady but urgent. "There's a problem behind the stage. The electrical wires. One of them glowed red. I think the insulation's burning inside the pipe. It's not safe," she sighed, more annoyed than alarmed. "Elijah, please. I don't have time for drama this morning. I saw it with my own eyes, Ma. We need to switch off that connection and call someone competent. If we don't..." She cut him off, eyes narrowing. "Elijah, leave electrical matters to the right people. Just do your sweeping. I'll send someone to check it." He opened his mouth again, but the tone in hers had already dismissed him. Deflated but not defeated, he returned to his mop and notebook, where he scribbled, "Tuesday, 6:52 a.m. Main assembly stage. Wire trunking glowing. Principal informed. No action taken." The next day, a man in ill-fitting coveralls showed up. The contractor, Mrs. Atim, had called. He poked at the trunking, shrugged, muttered something about it being no big issue, then left after less than 30 minutes, his envelope bulging a little as he waved goodbye. Elijah watched it all from the far end of the hall, jaw clenched. That evening, he stayed behind and walked the assembly stage again in the fading light. The glow had dimmed, but the faint smell of burnt plastic still hung in the air. It wasn't fixed, just buried. That Friday, during break, a group of boys from SS3 were huddled around the canteen, laughing too loud. Elijah passed by them, mop sloshing softly against the ground, when he heard his name, or rather, the version they gave him. "Oya, make way! The crippled electrician Don, come with him, fire stories again!" One jeered, another added in a mocking tone. "He say wire go explode, say we go burn. Maybe no witchcraft?" Laughter erupted, the kind that feeds on humiliation. Elijah stopped, turned. For a moment, his eyes were darker than usual, not angry, just tired in a way that felt deeper than age. He looked straight at them and said, quietly but clearly, "You will laugh until your shadows are on fire." The laughter slowed. Then came a fresh wave of cackling, louder, crueler. But not everyone laughed. Ngozi, who had been walking past with her books hugged to her chest, paused. She didn't say anything, but her eyes lingered on Elijah, uncertain, that flicker of concern in her gaze. It was the only warmth he'd received all day. Elijah turned and walked away. That night, he stayed up later than usual, watching the single bulb above his bed tremble with the generator's pulse. He opened his notebook and added another line. "They don't believe, but the wire remembers asterisk." And deep in his chest, something began to stir, slow and heavy, like storm clouds forming. The signs grew louder with each passing day. First, it was the flickering lights in the SS2 block, small, erratic pulses that most chalked up to NEPA behaviour. Then the staff room sockets began to buzz faintly, like angry bees hiding behind plastic casings. The students started noticing too. Outlets grew warm to the touch. A faint burning smell lingered in the senior science lab after every double period. Still, no one paid attention, except Elijah. He took his concerns once more to Mr. Chuks during a short break, voice low and imploring. "Sir, the faults are spreading. The circuits are old. Some wires are exposed where students pass daily." But Mr. Chuks, who'd been teaching long enough to grow immune to near tragedies, merely sighed and sipped his lukewarm coffee. "This is Nigeria, Elijah. Everything sparks. If we raised alarms every time, we'd never rest. Besides, the principal already brought someone. You worry too much, my friend." Elijah nodded slowly, but said nothing. That night, long after the school gate had closed and the compound was swallowed in shadows, he returned. With his old tools wrapped in a cloth bag, he moved like a ghost through the corridors. He loosened faulty sockets and retightened terminals. Where plastic had melted or cracked, he wrapped wires in fresh tape from his dwindling supply. In the main hall, he carefully disconnected a faulty overhead bulb and made a small note on his hand-drawn circuit map, a complex diagram that stretched across several pages in his notebook, mapping the school's ancient, patched-together electrical system. No one else knew it existed. No one else cared. But Elijah remembered what it meant to forget. 12 years ago, his workshop had been his pride. That morning, he'd been late, just 10 minutes. He'd left a junior technician to run a test on a new rewiring job for a salon. The boy was confident. Elijah trusted him. But a miswired neutral met a live terminal, and the sparks became a fire. Elijah's legs caught the blast. The apprentice, Bayo, didn't make it. Elijah woke up in the hospital to the news. The police questioned him. Clients vanished. His partner fled. And a marker, who'd once held his scarred hands and promised to wait, simply left. He hadn't just lost his workshop that day. He'd lost everything he thought made him a man. Now he couldn't bear to watch another place fall apart because of silence. He worked at night and prayed in the morning. Quiet, aching prayers, whispered into the peeling walls of his room. "Lord, let them listen. Let me fix something before it breaks." But the signs kept growing. A week later, a teacher unplugging a faulty extension cord in the art room yelped in pain. Her hand bore a small blister, the result of a short burst of current. The story buzzed briefly among the staff, then fizzled out like everything else. No action followed. The students, meanwhile, had found new energy in their mockery. One morning, Elijah passed a group by the water tank and heard them chuckle as someone said, "Better stay clear. Baba wire say fire day near." They mimicked his limp, shuffled around like broken robots, and laughed themselves breathless. Elijah didn't stop this time. He just kept walking. But Ngozi saw, and something in her snapped. "That's not funny," she said sharply, hugging her books to her chest. The laughter paused. Toby turned, eyebrows raised. "You say waiting?" "He's trying to help," Ngozi said, quieter now but standing firm. "He's the only one who even notices the faults." Tobe sneered. "You want to join his electrician ministry? Go and sweep with him then." But Ngozi didn't flinch. She simply walked away, shoulders stiff with silent fury. From then on, tension hung in the air. Toby glared whenever he saw her speaking to Elijah, and she began leaving small notes by his mop bucket. "Thank you. Be safe." Once, she left him a roll of new electrical tape. Elijah said nothing, but her quiet acts lit small sparks inside him, sparks that reminded him he wasn't entirely alone. Still, the silence around the danger gnawed at him. He tried again, left anonymous notes under the principal's door, typed in careful block letters. Stage trunking compromised. Lab circuit overheated. Urgent repairs needed. The notes vanished. Nothing changed. He began withdrawing, a slow fade into himself. His eyes looked heavier, his steps more laboured. When he wasn't working or fixing things at night, he sat on the edge of his creaky bed and stared at the map of circuits spread across his wall, a web of wires, of warnings, of what-ifs. He knew something was coming. He felt it in his bones, the same way he'd felt it years ago. But this time, no one would listen. And every morning, the school moved on, oblivious, bustling, laughing, until one day it wouldn't. The day was meant to be a celebration. Inter-house sports prep filled the school with unusual energy. Students ran about in jerseys, teachers barked orders, and the main school hall buzzed with last-minute decorating. Brightly coloured fabrics draped the stage, hastily stapled near hanging light fixtures. Extension cords snaked across the floor. The air was thick with excitement, and no one noticed the faint smell of something burning. It began quietly, a subtle pop behind the stage, then a spark from a neglected wire where two overworked sockets clashed. The spark danced into a bundle of cloth already soaked from a careless spill of generator fuel earlier that morning. Within seconds, a small flame caught hold. It licked upward, hungry and fast, consuming the edge of a banner and setting it ablaze. A shriek rang out from a student nearby, followed by another, and then chaos. The fire spread like it had been waiting, clawing at the curtains, the ceiling tiles, the makeshift decorations. Smoke poured into the air, thick and dark, choking. The crowd surged. Teachers yelled contradictory instructions. Some students stampeded toward the main doors, only to find them jammed, swollen shut from months of humidity and neglect. The side exits were bolted. Panic escalated. Children pushed, fell, screamed. The school hall turned into a trap. From across the compound, Elijah saw the smoke curling into the sky. His heart stopped. Then he ran, limping with terrifying urgency. He dragged his leg across the gravel as fast as his body would allow, pain stabbing with every step. He had feared this moment, dreaded it with every note he wrote, every socket he taped, and now it was here. Smoke coiled out of the entrance like a serpent. Screams echoed inside. He reached the side of the hall and pulled from his pocket an old, rusting key. The emergency exit key he had secretly kept after witnessing the door jam once during a drill. No one had ever fixed it. No one had cared. Elijah had. He shoved the key into the lock and turned. Once, twice. The bolt groaned, then gave way. The door swung open. Heat rushed out in a wave. Elijah didn't hesitate. He stormed in, half blind, eyes stinging, lungs screaming for clean air. He found the first student slumped near the edge of the stage, a young boy coughing, his hands over his head. Elijah grabbed him and half carried, half dragged him to the open door. Again and again he returned, pulling out students one by one. Some stumbled out behind him, dazed and gasping. Others he had to lift, calling them "my child" between ragged breaths. In the chaos, his coat sleeve brushed a flaming curtain. It caught, a sudden burst of fire curling up his arm. He tore it off, the heat searing his skin. When a collapsing beam threatened to fall near a little girl curled under a desk, he lunged and shielded her with his body, taking the brunt of falling embers on his back. No one had seen heroism like this before. Out of the smoke, he emerged again and again, blackened and coughing, his limp worsening. And then, the final weapon. From behind the stage, he pulled a fire extinguisher, not the school's rusted, useless ones, but a full, functioning unit from his own small stash, the one he had brought from home and tucked away, just in case. With practiced hands, he unleashed it at the flames licking toward the student seats. The foam hissed and cooled what it could. Minutes later, too many minutes, the wail of fire trucks filled the air. Firefighters stormed the hall, quickly dousing the remaining blaze. The danger finally began to ebb, but Elijah had collapsed by then. Smoke blackened, blistered, breath shallow, he lay just outside the hall, his notebook still in his pocket, singed but intact. Around him, students and teachers stared, stunned, silent. For the first time, they saw not the janitor, not the limping cleaner or the man they mocked, but the person who had risked everything to save them, who had warned them, who had never stopped caring, even when no one else did. Ngozi knelt beside him, tears streaking down her soot-smudged face. She held his hand tightly. "Don't go, sir. Please don't go." And for the first time in years, Elijah let someone hold him. The soft beeping of machines and the sterile scent of antiseptic filled the quiet hospital room as morning light filtered through the blinds. Elijah stirred, his breath shallow but steady, his body wrapped in bandages and burns dressed carefully. When his eyes fluttered open, the first thing he saw was Ngozi, seated by his side, clutching his hand with both of hers, her eyes swollen from crying. Beside her stood Mr. Chuks, silent but visibly moved, and at the foot of the bed, To Elijah's surprise, stood Mrs. Atom. Her usually stern face was pale, her eyes rimmed with guilt. She stepped forward slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saved them all. I'm sorry, Elijah, for not listening, for everything." Her voice cracked, and for once, she looked at him not with authority, but with gratitude. News of Elijah's heroism had spread quickly. That same week, the school held a special assembly, this time not to recite empty pledges, but to honor a man who had lived one. Students gathered in solemn lines, no snickering, no sideways glances. Toby stepped forward, his usual swagger replaced with trembling sincerity. He looked at Elijah, who now stood at the podium in a clean shirt, his limp still there, but steadier. Tobe's voice broke. "I'm sorry, sir. I was wrong. We all were." He bowed his head, and the hall filled with applause, not out of formality, but out of reverence. Students clapped, some with tears in their eyes. The janitor they'd once mocked had become the man who saved their lives. Then Ngozi approached, holding a gift wrapped in brown paper. "We made this for you," she said softly. Elijah opened it to reveal a beautifully framed version of his worn notebook, each page carefully preserved, with annotations and little colour sketches around the margin. At the bottom was Ngozi's drawing, a cartoon of Elijah wearing a cape, mop in one hand, fire extinguisher in the other, standing tall with a lightning bolt behind him. The caption read, "Even broken tools can still fix things." Elijah smiled, a deep, quiet smile that reached into his eyes. Then, for the first time, he addressed the entire school. "I didn't save you because I was strong," he said, his voice calm, steady, yet filled with weight. "I saved you because I knew how it felt to lose everything, and I wouldn't let any of you feel that. Not if I could help it. Not again." There was silence, and then a standing ovation. That day, Mrs. Atim made an announcement. "From today, Mr. Elijah Ume will serve as Franklin High's official safety supervisor. His knowledge, dedication, and courage have saved us once. He will now help ensure this never happens again." The students erupted into cheers. As the assembly closed, Elijah stood near the stage, no longer invisible, no longer alone. For the first time in years, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. His purpose had never truly left him. It had only waited, like a spark in the dark, until the world was finally ready to see the fire inside. The morning sun cast soft golden rays across the freshly polished tiles of the school hall. It was quiet, peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos it once held. Elijah stepped inside, his limp still present, but his steps firmer now, steadier. Children greeted him with wide smiles and enthusiastic waves. "Good morning, Uncle Elijah," they chorused, their voices full of warmth. Tobe, once the loudest of his mockers, stood by the door in a neatly pressed uniform. He offered a respectful nod and gently held the door open. Elijah paused for a second, nodded back, and entered. Ngozi walked beside him, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her cardigan, her smile soft. They said little. They didn't need to. The silence between them was filled with understanding. Elijah made his way to the corner of the hall, where he gently leaned his old mop against the wall. He stood still for a moment, looking around, at the repaired windows, the rewired lights, the freshly painted stage. His eyes fell on the light switch panel by the entrance. It had once sparked quietly, a warning ignored. Now it gleamed, fully restored. Just above it, a bronze plaque had been mounted, polished to a shine. It read, "Dedicated to Mr. Elijah Ume, the man who saw the fire before it came." Elijah smiled, not the quiet, tired smile he once wore, but something fuller, grateful, whole. As students bustled into the hall behind him, laughter echoing once more through safe walls, a final thought lingered, not loud, but true, like the steady hum of current flowing where it belonged. Respect isn't given because of a title. Sometimes it's earned quietly, with every step a broken man takes for others. And as the screen faded to black, the sound of children's laughter carried on, proof that someone, once invisible, had lit the way.